Good morning. Okay, today is Thursday, the 16th of August, 2018. This is the nybbles.io daily programming stream. My name is Jeff. I write code every day and I stream it here on Twitch Monday through Friday, working on a project called Basecode, which is a programming language that I'm designing. And this is the Bootstrap compiler written in C++ with the intention that once this gets to a sufficiently advanced stage, I'll be able to start rewriting Basecode in Basecode, so it will be then self-hosted. I am estimating that I am at the point where I could potentially begin rewriting the compiler in a self-hosted fashion towards the end of this year, and then I kind of expect that process to take me at least 6 months, if not longer, next year. Hello, official Dark Knight Studio. Welcome. Yesterday, after the stream, I ended up having to run all sorts of errands and never really got back to coding. By the time I could get back to it, my brain was fried, so didn't get much done. To think about some things, though. Even if I'm never able to, or if I'm not able to write code for periods of time, I still have the ability to kind of let the old meat computer kind of run things in the background for a while. Can't type today. So one of the things that I thought, I realized that I had changed pretty much all the interfaces now to take a reference to the compiler session, but I hadn't changed it for type. So So I'm going through and doing that now. Excuse me. Thanks for the host, Dev Chatter. Excuse me. Boy, oh boy. I am writing a compiler. So now I have another project called Ryu, which is a kind of game engine. Ryu is kind of waiting for some of the stuff that I'm doing with the interpreter in this compiler, and it's getting close. I think the interpreter, because I intend to use the interpreter in the Ryu game engine, and I think the interpreter is getting close to where it's fairly stable. But this specifically is a compiler for a programming language that could be used for anything, not specifically games, although it would be well suited for game development if one wanted to use it for such a thing. And I'm not, excluding the possibility that once I start rewriting the compiler to be self-hosted, that, I probably will have some test programs, and because I like games, I probably will definitely make some games with it. That won't be my primary goal starting towards the end of this year, but I could certainly see myself doing that, yeah. I am a self-taught programmer from an era where there were horse-drawn buggies and everything was in black and white. Um, it's not far off. For a good chunk of my childhood, my TV watching experience was black and white, ironically. Yes, I'm self-taught. I did not go to university. I do not have a classical education by any sense of the term. I did go to public school for a period of time, but eventually left public school and was homeschooled. Okay, what did I do? On element, I changed the signature for infer type and on-infer type. So we pass through the session now, reference to the session. And so I tidied these up for that. Pretty much everything else is just kind of responding to that. I did add an overload to session to return a const reference of program, because in this particular case, we're not modifying it, and it's probably bad if we did in that context, so just rule that one out. And then the rest of these are all just going to be updates to be grabbing or passing the session to infer type instead of the program pointer that it was. You dropped out of uni or you dropped out of high school? So if you're in the United States, then I'll make a suggestion for you. If you dropped out of high school, obviously you could get your GED. So that's one option. The other is that there are legitimate homeschool programs for high school. They're all self-directed, right? You don't have to go to a classroom. You just do the work on your own. Oftentimes they're open book, you know. Okay, if you're in the UK, yeah, then there's different options there. But I would just, yeah, definitely make sure that you get whatever the minimum credentialing is that would be equivalent to having gone to high school. Not, you know, in today's world, not that that, you know, means a whole lot, but it's one less stumbling block that you'll potentially run into down the road. But yeah, I'm kind of was in the same boat. I was never a good student. I have a horrible memory. I don't really take tests well. It's just, I've tried over the years, and I, you know, at different points in time, using different techniques, I had varying rates of, you know, more success taking tests, but I just was never very good at it. And that is an important ability to develop, to learn where your limits. Jeez, this thing's magnetic. Hey, move. You have to learn where your limits are, right? Know what your strengths and your weaknesses are. And it's not, yes, I don't know. We kind of have a culture of this sometimes, never give up. You're just being a pussy. You're not trying hard enough. And that can be true, right? You have to try, but there is a point at which there are diminishing returns. And so that's kind of a skill where you learn to evaluate your own capabilities and say, hey, you know what? If I go into a kitchen and try to cook, it's a disaster. Okay, so I could spend lots and lots of time to refine my ability to cook. But see, like in my case, I'm an ADD guy, right? And so, like, I like programming because it's sequential. Writing would be very similar, meaning that there aren't multiple, plates in the air, no pun intended, really. There are in my head, but I can kind of control those. And if one plate that I have spinning in my brain, if I ignore that for a while, it's not going to crash to the floor or burn down the kitchen. But if I go into a physical kitchen and I try to make food, well, if you do that and you do anything that's of any moderate complexity, you tend to have actually multiple things happening at once. And like, I have ADD. That's bad for me, right? Like, I really can't do that very well. I get distracted. I can never quite time things right. Or I get really involved in one part of the cooking process and then the others are ignored and then they suffer. Now, if I were given one task in the kitchen, if someone said, you just, crack eggs and put them into a bowl or something, right? Like, I could probably do that okay. But as a chef, I think I'd be very challenged, right? And it would be constantly tiring for me, right? Like, I would never get a big thrill out of it because I would just always be really anxious and overexcited. Same thing probably. Like, I think woodworking or metalworking or anything like that probably could do okay there because I could probably chunk things up as individual tasks similar to programming. But I don't know why I went off on that topic. Anyway, I think it was because I was talking about test taking and knowing your limits, right? I don't see the point of going to uni. You get yourself into 10K plus debt and have to pay it off for a little scrap of paper, not really any real world experience. I've learned to code myself in Game Maker Studio and a few other languages like Lua and Python. Yep. Yeah, again, here's the unfortunate reality of the world. That little piece of paper, I agree with you. Again, I'm not saying that you cannot learn things in university. I think you can. So I am not, don't jump down my throat at what I'm about to say here. I think it depends on the individual, and varying people are going to get varying benefits from the actual process itself of going to university. However, setting that aside, there's another insidious but reality-based reason why people do this, right? We live in a system right now that loves credentialing. It loves to tell you that you do not qualify because X, whatever X is, and X could be a rather complex predicate. You aren't tall enough, you don't come from the right family, you didn't go to the right university, you don't have the right piece of paper, you don't have multiple pieces of paper. Whatever the reason might be, that you don't qualify. And of course, this is arbitrary. Of course, this is credentialing. That's why I call it that. It has nothing to do with what your skills really are, how much you know. It's just an artificial mechanism that the system uses, the market uses, to either keep wages high for the participants that are inside of that credentialed circle, or to make the barrier to entry sufficiently high enough that it slows the entry of other participants into that market. It really doesn't. I mean, you could also say, because people would be like, well, Jeff, legitimately, the credential is something that an employer can use to verify that these people really can do what they say they can do. And I've been an employer many times, and no, it doesn't, not really. Not on its own. And certainly if you use those solely as your mark for whether or not someone is qualified, you're probably going to be very unhappy with the average result you get there. But that doesn't change the fact that they're out there. And so, if you're young and you're not nailed down, you don't have a family or other commitments, then one thing that you might want to do, I just, hindsight for me, so take some advice from somebody who's looking into the past. Even if you don't like it, even if you don't enjoy it, just rationalize to yourself, okay, I'm getting these pieces of paper because I need the credentials. Now, you don't have to go to uni for that. You could get certifications. There's other ways potentially, right? You can have those pieces of paper that are equivalent, but it's something to consider, right? It's something to put some thought to, because now I don't advise going into debt. So I tell everybody on this channel that brings up education and university, I always say, if you can do it break even, meaning you can pay from cash flow, or you can do it for free because your particular, country or local government or whatever makes it possible for you to participate in an education system without having to pay out of pocket, then I say in those cases, it is much more of a no-brainer, right? Because yes, you're losing some time potentially, but you're not digging a hole financially for yourself. Now, if you have to borrow money, like here in the United States and perhaps sounds like in the UK on some level, then it becomes a different equation. Then I think you really need to seriously look at how much you will absolutely have to spend all in, and what degree you're getting, what institution you're getting it from, because in that point you're paying for a name, right? And so that name had better be good. That name had better confer some benefit above and beyond the money that you're paying for it. And then what's the likelihood, that you're going to get some kind of return on that in the field that you're choosing? And that can be a very difficult equation to work through, because things change so quickly nowadays, and what looks like could be a good future career isn't actually going to be a good future career. So I always caution people here in the United States, at any place where you have to borrow significant money for university education, really, really think about it carefully, because when I was a kid in the 70s and the 80s, it probably was more of a no-brainer. Just go to college, because you're moving into a cohort that is small, and it's going to confer a lot of disproportionate advantage to you to have that versus your peers that don't. But I would argue by the early 2000s that metric started to sway the other way, because everybody was doing it. And eventually, it doesn't have to be 100%. Once you're at, like, say, 50% or more, there's no more advantage, right? Then it's just something that you do, just like going to high school, right? Metal Faces 510, welcome, says, word up, job training needs a Yes, I completely agree. I mean, we're going to have to do something, right? Now, I say that and nothing will ever happen. It'll just get worse. But this notion that companies can be completely divorced from how their employees are learning and credentialed, it wasn't that way for a huge chunk of, our history. And I don't think it being that way now really gives us any benefit other than companies can go to their shareholders and say, see, look, we don't have to pay these people as much and we don't have to train them. Isn't that great? And I don't think that's a very long-term way of looking at it. Move says, I spent 1 year at uni. After 5 years on a technical high school for electronics IT, thought studying abstract mathematics would help at solving complicated programming problems more efficiently. When I realized that it didn't, I quit. Yeah. I mean, yeah. Again, like, I guess there are two ways you could look at university education. What I'm going to argue, or what I'm going to label, is the original intent and the modern intent. The original intent was that you would go to university, and of course there's tons of class politics and all sorts of other stuff here historically, but the general idea was that it was a rite of passage, right? For upper class folks, going to university was a social experience. It was a way to be introduced to your cohort, essentially, who were going to be out in the world, most likely being managers and business owners and all that good stuff. And it was a way of being introduced to older alumni who were also movers and shakers. And then on the education side, it was, very general, liberal arts plus, maybe, if you specialized. But the idea was to give you this very broad, eclectic understanding of, the world, which is all great, right? But those people who go to university for that reason, which I would argue nowadays is a very small subset, they don't give a shit. I mean, like, their future's set, right? They're not going to university because university makes their future. They're just going there because it's a family thing at that point. It's a societal, cultural thing that you just do that. Like, if I were to make an example of that, I would use, like, George W. Bush, right, here in the United States. The guy is not the smartest tack in the box, but he went to a good university. I think it was Yale. And he went because it was a family thing, right? He was introduced to people, he was a part of Skull and Bones. He was, that's really in that camp, right? It's more, university has this almost kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Native Americans they still do, would tell stories, right, of their tribe. In a way, like university education for the ultra wealthy or the very upper class, that's what university is, kind of the same thing. It's just something you go do. It's not that it does anything in that realm or that there's any expectation there. It's a marketing thing. It's a rubbing elbows thing. Then the second camp is everybody else. And this is where, in the 80s and the 90s and then on from there, the government started seeing, I think, into the future a little bit and realizing, shit, we're going to have employment problems. How are we going to deal with this? Oh, tell everybody to go to, college. Tell everybody to go to university. And, and then university kind of implicitly became job training, right? Now, the universities didn't see it that way, right? They maybe adjusted slightly, to make their stuff more marketable in a way for folks who wanted something more practical, but not, computer science is, I think, largely what it's been since it became a thing. And I think a lot of other disciplines within academia, within the academy, right, are basically the same. And there always were the specialized cases, right? Nursing, doctoring, lawyering, civil engineering, right? Those always, any of those that already had 100+ years of history behind them, they largely stayed the same. But everybody's perception of why you would go to university changed. Instead of it being a societal rite of passage and just something that you did as a young adult because that's how you got introduced to all the people that you needed to be introduced to, and how you formed, relationships and bonds that would take you through your professional career, not because it was job placement or job guarantees, right? It was a, specialized social grouping. Now we have a bunch of people that go to university because they're going to get a job out of it. And that's obviously, I think, not much help. I wanted a career change from bricklaying and went to uni going into final year. I thought would help me, especially with being a little older. And again, everything I'm saying here is I'm making generalized statements. Everybody's different, right? But yeah, it just all depends on who you are, who you know. I mean, again, it ultimately comes down to who you know. And I would argue, and again, I'm very cynical, so take that into account. Right. Going to a top tier school like a Harvard, right? It's, yes, there's value in the name. I went to Harvard, but I would almost argue it's the other way. The value is not so much the name, it's who you get to meet because you went to Harvard, right? It's who you get to meet because you went to Yale. That's really, I think, where a lot of the intrinsic value from some of that stuff comes from. And this is where I think the job training story kind of breaks down, is that my experience is that skills are almost kind of just assumed. Yeah, in other words, if you graduate and become a doctor, right? Medical doctor, they just, people who are going to meet you and relationships you're going to form, they're just going to assume that you're a good doctor, that you know how to do doctoring, right? Then it's, well, where do you hail from? Who do you know? Then that's where that stuff starts to become more valuable. Let's see. Edis Do, don't know if I'm saying that right. Killing myself to finally grasp WebGL second year in the JavaScript world. Any advice on graphics pipelines? Born on the last mile of the marathon, acting like they've won the race. Yeah. I see what you mean there, I think. Any advice on graphics pipelines? So, I guess you're asking about the different phases of how you would want to do rendering, like how many passes perhaps that you would want to do for an engine or something like that. I'm guessing maybe that's what you're referring to, not sure. Nowadays, quite honestly, And I mean, Jessica Mack would be a good example if you wanted to check out her channel. GPUs, and again, I got to be careful with how I say this, but for a long time, like, graphics rendering was all about, okay, yeah. So for a long time, graphics rendering was all about geometry. How many triangles can you push? And, there were limits, right, to how much texture mapping and lighting and all this other stuff you could do because we didn't have shaders. So this idea of having really complex pipelines where you do multiple passes because the graphics hardware itself just really wasn't helping you all that much. What I see a lot of today, and again, like I say, like Jessica Mack if you watch her stuff, that would be a good example because her stuff's almost all shader now. That's where I would kind of in a very simplistic way, and again, I'd have to really think about this, and if I sat down to write a 3D engine, I might change my mind, I don't know. But I think a lot of folks are just doing the passes inside of their shaders today. They're doing as much on the GPU as they absolutely can and not really bouncing back and forth between the CPU and GPU if they can avoid it. I don't know if that's really very helpful, but again, if I were to sit down to make a 3D engine today, I probably would go down a very similar road. I would probably focus very heavily on how can I build shaders that just do pretty much all this, and any passes that you would have had like in a classical engine, because you would have to post-process the image, right, multiple times, because the GPU couldn't do that. Yeah, I think I would definitely want to avoid that. Now, again, there's lots of considerations you have to, you're just saying WebGL. So I think generically, if you're just talking WebGL, PCs, really high-end, video cards, not so much of a big deal. But if you're going to try to target, consoles or other systems that have different levels of support, then you're going to have to maybe think about that a little bit differently. But I think if you're just targeting PCs, then it's probably a little easier. Okay. I'm using a Mac Pro, which is a standalone machine. Yeah, I've been kind of messing with the DSLR a little bit. Yeah, my name's Jeff. Okay, so now okay, so now the AST evaluator and the element builder have been moved to session. So I'm continuing to deflate program here. We're getting down to the last few bits and pieces. Excuse me. All right. I had to have broken something there, but yeah. Oops. Okay, ESWL 6. Wunderbar. Very good, very good. All right. So kind of the next step of the process, I took the element builder and the AST evaluator and put those on session. Because really session is kind of evolving into this bucket of state for a particular compilation process. And I just changed the constructor, added accessors for those. Then on program, the builder, yeah, the way that WeChat and Twitch interact is not 100% perfect. If you chat something within a certain period of time of joining, then it shows that you joined. But then likewise, if you don't chat again within a certain period of time, it thinks that you left and you really didn't. It's just WeChat and Twitch don't, they don't see eye to eye 100%. For some reason, Twitch sends lots of join and leave messages for that IRC interprets as join and leave. So I had to configure WeChat to kind of filter out a lot of it. Otherwise, like, chat would just load up with join, 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 leave, 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 join, join, join. It was messy. Temporarily, I had to change push new block to take a session reference. That's going to change, but I took the element builder and the AST evaluator out. You know, as part of that same refactoring, I'm kind of thinking that this needs to come out as well. And I think that should just go on session. Okay. And then I think what we'll have to do is element builder. Just going through program for the elements. So it's going to have to be session, program, elements, session, elements. Excuse me. Hey, Dr. Robot. I am working on a project called Basecode, which is a programming language I'm designing, and I'm writing the Bootstrap compiler right now. Specifically, I'm in the process of refactoring some things, tidying them up so that I can kind of work on the next phase of things and not kind of be stumbling over a bad structure. Not bad, just not optimal, I guess. To Dr. Robot's question, I use Dropbox, and I'm a sucker, I guess. I pay for it. But if I were not going to use Dropbox, I mean, here's the thing, right? You're going to have to pay for storage somewhere. So, you know, wherever you can get disk space, I guess, find the cheapest, reliable disk space that you feel comfortable with. And then I would just use rsync, you know, so if, yeah. The trick is just going to be finding reliable disk space in the cloud somewhere that meets your pricing requirements. And then once you've done that, you can actually just do the backups and everything with rsync. And rsync is pretty sweet. I mean, you don't have to do too much to make that work. I mean, at the end of the day, Dropbox, that's essentially what it's doing. I don't know that it uses rsync directly, but conceptually it's the same thing. Okay. Okay, so all that's left in program, which I'll do in another pass, is essentially the scope stuff and the identifier stuff. So let's review this. Okay, so session now has the element map, the builder, the evaluator on it. Those have come from program to the session, and program has now lost the element map in the builder and the evaluator, and then everything else here is going to be just changes because of the API changing. So I can just kind of peruse these really quickly. There's not going to be any behavioral change here. Just, I had to add, for some reason, like some of the collections use the CN and CBN and some don't. I don't know. I'll have to come back to that one. Not a big deal. They're just wrappers around existing iterator functions, but element builder, we pass in the session pointer now. Code DOM formatter had to refactor this to take the session instead of program. but it was a fairly minor refactoring to get that to work. AST evaluator, we now pass in the reference to the session, and we store that, and then the evaluator just uses that. And we don't have to pass session into evaluate now. So it evaluates very quickly, you know, it's shrinking how much state it needs, which is great. That's good. And then I had to go through and update everything to work off of session. Okay, so that's that cycle of refactoring complete. Peter's Gamer asks, in which university did you study? I did not go to university. I'm one of those evil self-taught programmers. I knew it based on your previous comment about doing things that actually work instead of just whatever makes money. Yeah. Okay. I'm down to this last little bucket of state that's in program. Okay, I'm gonna take a really short break, get some coffee. When I come back, I'm gonna noodle on what I need to do here. Be right back. Okay. I have coffee. So, I mean, I could just move all of these, because block, this actually belongs to program, and just like every other element. But, so I could just take these as is, just move them to session. I would put accessors around them so we're not touching the fields directly. Other than that, I mean, I could, then all this other functionality would have to move to session. But that's what kind of worries me, is like a lot of these helper functions would have to move. And I just, I don't know that I want them on session directly. So I could introduce something like a scope manager or something, I guess. Because that's really what this stuff is, what's left.
Well, you did it.
Is it's all...
Congratulations. You're on your way to looking and feeling fit, firm, and better than ever. Take care. Don't quit.
Yeah, I'm just gonna do that. I can always rename it later. Hey, Cloud Journeyman. Pretty good. Pretty good. Can't complain too much. I see the light at the end of the tunnel on my current refactory. Which is always good. Wow, look at that. Program is back, almost back to his little lonesome self. We're not going to do anything with emit, nor compile. Oops, accidentally grab type check. Didn't mean to move that one. Not yet, anyway. Okay, so let's go to session. We're going to add scope mangler. I should have called it scope mangler. That would have been a good name for it. Sessions, including a header file. How to play the header file dance. Do you work from home? Yes, although it depends on your definition of work. I don't have a full-time job. I'm self-employed, so yes, I work from home, but it's not like I have an employer that's allowing me to do that. I just do it. Any cache override? Oh, gotta change the battery in my camera. There we go. Hey, EverX. There we go. I checked the tracking on my continuous power, and I wish it would get here. It's so annoying. Yes, it's so annoying. Let's see, do you have any problems working from home? Like, do you get bored of spending a lot of time at one place? I don't have those issues. I mean, occasionally, maybe. But in general, no. I would much rather work here than other places. Yeah. Again, you know, everybody's at different points in their life, right? When you're young, yeah, you want to go places, do stuff, you know. When I was younger, you know, in my 20s or whatever, sure. Like, I probably, well, I certainly didn't work at home. It just wasn't a thing that much at the time. But if you had asked me that same question, I probably would have said, no, I'll just go into the office or whatever. How many hours do you work a day? So as far as programming is concerned, I typically put in 5 hours a day. 5.5 is really kind of my optimal programming duration. And I've just learned that over years and years of doing it and realizing that I get diminishing returns if I work more than that. Now, does that mean that sometimes, or that I always work only 5 hours? You know, do I sometimes work more than that? Sure. You know, but it has to kind of be organic, meaning if I had some project manager that was yelling and screaming at me to work more than 5 hours a day, I wouldn't do it. But if I'm like really into a problem, if I'm really into something and I'm in flow and it isn't a burden, I'm not feeling tired, then I might work more. but it has to fit, right? And the pieces have to come together naturally. It can't be forced. And does streaming help with that? That's a good question. um, Here's, give me one sec here. Let me pop this issue off my meat stack here. Otherwise, I'm going to get, oh, so confused. What are you complaining about? Okay, so Cache Override asked if streaming helps. No. Would have to be my honest response to that. I like streaming. I do. I mean, it's not that I dislike it or anything like that, but it is a different experience. And the reality is, even though like I really want to go out of my way not to have the streaming affect how I do things, it does. And here's where I think it really has kind of hit home for me, or where I've noticed it the most. There's a lot of stuff in programming that is boring as shit, right? It's just like fighting with CMake, fighting with third-party dependencies, fighting with, it's just stuff that you have to do, but it's boring. And it's not. People start giving me advice on how to be more efficient when I don't cut and paste for like 3 lines of code. Watching me like fix build problems or deal with cross-platform nonsense or like that stuff, people would just get irritated with it. I mean, that's my impression just based on how people respond to me just editing code, right? And that stuff it's arduous, it's slow, there is no automatic magic button for any of it, right? It's just change this setting, recompile the whole thing. Oop, didn't work. Change that setting. So there's a lot of things that Everex, you and a couple others are probably the rare exception, right? I mean, most of the folks that watch are not going to get that. And on the one hand, you think, okay, well, then it would be educational for them to see it. But there are certain kinds of deep activities that I avoid on stream. I just don't bother doing them because I just think it would be irritating for me and irritating for the audience. So problem number one is it does kind of impact how you go about doing things, which can be okay. I mean, there's not, again, it's not like it's bad, or it's just another layer of stuff, right, that you have to think about. You can't just do, I guess, right away without thinking it through potentially. The other thing, which again, I am not complaining, don't take this the wrong way, I do get asked the same questions a lot. And on some level, that gets tiring. And it's, yes, I could write a FAQ, yes, I could, there's all these things I could do that seem like they would solve the problem, but they don't really solve the problem. They maybe ameliorate it slightly, but yeah, in the end, it's not. So if you're having problems focusing, I would probably say that streaming is not a good thing to do to yourself. And there's other stuff, right? Like you're always kind of messing with your environment. Your camera doesn't work, your sound doesn't work. Somebody complains that something's too loud or too quiet. Again, I'm not picking on anybody. It happens, it's just part of the thing, but it impacts your flow a little bit. And also, there's a rate at which I can't keep up with chat, right? So if chat gets really, really busy, and that's only happened to me a couple times because I don't have that popular of a channel, but I can only keep up with it at a certain rate, and once it goes beyond that, I fall behind. Then you're missing things potentially. It's taken me like, I would say it took me like 3 months to really get comfortable doing stuff on stream and interacting at the same time. And I would say I'm not the best at it. I just got reasonably good at it, but it's still, like I say, depending on what you're doing, there are definitely tasks that, like I try not to go quiet on stream, but sometimes, like, depending on what I'm doing, it's too many CPU cycles for the gray matter, right, to do both. So Huge and All says, why did you start streaming? So why did I start streaming? Okay, I think I've told this story before. And for some folks, this is, people who've been in the industry, this might make sense. For those of you who haven't been in the industry for very long, maybe it won't make as much sense. But I started my programming career at a time when open source was, well, actually, open source was not a thing. Free software was a thing, and I knew who Richard was. But you did not have conversations at your employer or with your clients about free software. It just wasn't a thing, right? There was no GitHub. There was the internet, but the web was not a thing. So I grew up and became experienced in an era where things were private, right? Your software was proprietary. Even if you had built something 20 times, if you went to a different company, you built that thing the 21st time, that was totally normal. That's the way it worked. People were, this sounds weird nowadays, but I remember having debates with customers and with employers because they were skittish about using a third-party library. What if they go out of business? What if it breaks? How are we going to fix it? I don't want to fix their code. They would just rather write it themselves, right? Okay, so keeping that in mind, for the better part of my career, right, the idea that you did stuff out in the open and you had a portfolio and that you could go to companies and show them gobs and gobs of code and look at how productive I am and yada, 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 just didn't exist, right? And it's like the boiling frog analogy. By the time it did exist, I was used to doing things other ways. So needless to say, I've built lots and lots of stuff that no one will ever see, and it's locked behind NDAs and corporate garbage, right? So, and then the market really started to change. I've been a freelancer, consultant, whatever you want to call it, for a good chunk of my career, and what happened was, well, several things have happened, and I've talked about some of them. I've talked about, the disintermediation of software developers in the marketplace. Really briefly, what that is that a lot of companies have gone the vendor management route with software developers, and even if I knew a hiring manager inside of, say, some bank or some other company with vendor management, that doesn't matter anymore because the hiring manager can't. He doesn't make decisions. He's not involved in that process anymore. So if I contact, the person I know, he's going to tell me, I'm sorry, you have to talk to vendor systems, and typically it's a third-party company. It's not even inside the company. It's somebody else. And this is pretty insidious, unfortunately, because if you're like me and your entire, business and career has been based around the people that you know inside of these companies, when that goes away, you're kind of screwed. And then the market shifted to this model of, fuck you, we don't trust you at all, you can't program, prove it to us, right? And I mean, on some level, right? Companies, teams, managers, whoever, always kind of wanted to try to vet you, but things have gone super extreme, right? It's no longer just having a conversation with somebody. It's now, you have to go way above and beyond to prove to people that you can even just write one line of code. And and there's all sorts of other really odious things going on there as well, right? Like companies really just want to hire kids. They don't want to hire old fogies like me. So they purposely set up, gauntlets and processes that filter people like me out. And anyway, so business changed a lot, and I had to kind of think about, okay, well, how am I going to do this? Well, the unfortunate reality is just, okay, I don't have anything out in the public. I need to go put something out in the public. So I need to build a bunch of open source stuff that, I'm going to build what I want to build, but I have to build stuff in such a way that, I can show it off. I can, hey, look, here's some stuff I did, and so that was one. Two, I thought originally when I started earlier this year, I thought I was going to do a lot more training stuff. Then I realized what a royal pain in the ass it is to do, like, there's a difference between live streaming, right, and shooting video that you're going to edit together and try to make it look professional. The latter is a lot of work. It is insanely time consuming. I thought programming was time consuming. Editing video sucks. Because, there's just all sorts of, and I'm sure, again, the more skilled you are at it, the more frequently you do it, the better you get. But I had thought about, making a lot of these more syllabus-based video series, and I shot a ton of video and then went to kind of edit it together and just realized, like, holy cow, this is going to take me a year to do. And, so I kind of fell off of that, unfortunately. And I've kind of I've adjusted my, my goals slightly throughout the year in terms of what I thought I was going to do, and, all that good stuff. And so, and then on top of that, right, is, and this sounds, the more I'm going to say this, and it's actually going to make me kind of like shudder a little bit, but again, I had a career where within the community that I was known in, I had relationships and I got work and all that. Well, when you're kind of now disintermediated, meaning that, those relationships don't matter anymore, and it's all about just your public visibility, then it becomes this branding exercise, right? So, and like I said, I originally had this conception that I would do these, like, I didn't really set out to stream. I set out to build more, like I say, structured, higher professional quality educational video series. And, my thought was that that was going to be a branding exercise. But then I realized, and I guess this makes me sound like a whiner, but I realized how much work it is. And not, again, it's like how much work for what reward is really, when I say that, that's what I mean. It's not that I don't really enjoy editing tons of video, but if I thought the reward was going to be significantly outsized, right, I would do it, but I don't. So therefore, right, I kind of shifted gears, and then the streaming was really more or less me kind of testing myself. Like, okay, you got to get comfortable on camera. Because a lot of the early video I shot, I was very stilted, right? It just didn't come across super well. And so, I had to get to the point where I could ignore the camera. Because that's, like, if you watch a movie or a TV show or something, and you say, man, the acting's just not really that good. But you can't quite put your finger on what it is. And in my opinion, it's because they aren't comfortable right in front of the camera. They're thinking about the camera, and that changes your performance. A good actor acts something, and I'm not saying I'm acting, but it's kind of the same thing. You can't constantly be thinking that, oh shit, I gotta, I'm not doing this right, or it screws stuff up, right? So I thought, okay, well, streaming would be good practice for that on some level, and I think that's true. I think it has, and then the other part of it was I already was coding every day, right? I had my regular routine, and a lot of folks that I know would say to me, "Oh, well, you should just stream, right? You're already coding every day for 5.5 hours. Just stream it, and you'll get practice and all that good stuff." And so that's where I started streaming on Twitch, and but in order to be successful on Twitch, you need to have a consistent schedule, which I have anyway. But then what happens, right, and it's just one of these kind of things that you don't notice right away, but then you have a regular schedule, except if you weren't streaming on some days, if you didn't, you had to do something slightly later or whatever, you might do that. It's like with me taking my daughter to school, right? If I weren't streaming, I would just, it's not like it would change anything really, but because I'm streaming, then it impacts the streaming schedule, and yeah. Now, with all that said, I enjoy streaming. I enjoy doing it, but everything has a cost, right? And not necessarily in money, in flexibility and complication. And I'm not going to mention any streamers here, but there definitely are some folks who probably shouldn't be streaming. They just don't have, like, I consider myself extremely introverted. And I think the only reason, like, that I'm able to do this is because you all are really not here, right? I'm just talking to myself, which I do anyway. But there are definitely some folks who I watched, and I'm talking about programmers. I watch their streams and I'm like, oh man, like, yeah, you fit our caricature perfectly. You should just stop. Again, I'm not going to name any names, but so there is, either you have to recognize that there is a skill set, right, to communicating and presenting on video, even in a, amateurish way, and you have to try to like get to at least a basic level to be able to do that, or maybe, give up the ghost. Look, if you're growing an audience, if you've got people that show up and they want to see your stuff, you're not who I'm talking about, You guys are real, but you understand what I'm saying, right? It's a social thing, right? It's like, I can do this. If I were, it's a different level of anxiety if you're doing something in person versus doing it virtually like this. But I think even some people who do it virtually have a really hard time with it. So yeah. Although with hecklers, I do have to say, like, comedians, I think, always say this: whoever has the mic wins, right? So at the end of the day, I find it amazing that people even, go down that road, because you're gonna lose. I'm pretty good in person, it just, I don't have as much problem with it as I think some folks do. And a lot of that is because I just, kind of learned to, like, bullshit my way through a lot of that stuff. But, if I get the sense that the audience isn't really, like, I've done some talks at clients and stuff where, like, I get these evil looks from architects, or, and it's like, why are you talking, how dare you say that, microservices isn't a good idea? What do you mean orchestration problem? You can just kind of tell, right, that they're pitching a fit. And, but, in C-Line, it's Control W with the key bindings that I'm using. But your key bindings might be different. So I guess going back to the whole, why did I start streaming? I guess this whole year I've kind of viewed as me trying to reinvent myself on some level. But what I discovered is it doesn't really seem to work. At least not so far. In fact, I would even go so far as to say that I think the streaming might be a negative for me at this point. Yeah, because of course, you're not supposed to be a person, right? You're not supposed to have opinions. You're not supposed to shuck or work against the dogma. You're supposed to embrace it. So then, then it becomes an acting job, right? Then it's not about me just getting on stream and, you get me and that's who I am. No, it becomes political. Hipster. And I mean, I think you guys have followed. I mean, I was just going to say, anybody who's followed me long enough knows that I don't really give a shit about that stuff. So there's no way I'm changing. But again, looking at it objectively from the outside and saying, okay, am I getting what I thought I was going to get out of this? I have to be honest and say, probably not. But I forget who said it. I can't remember if it was Move or Everex or someone. And it keeps sticking in my mind because it keeps coming up so much lately, it seems like. But like this elitism it's not like, if John Carmack told me that I suck, or if Michael Abrash told me, dude, you suck, don't, just quit, don't even try anymore, I'd listen. But that's not the case. But at the same time, there's this really, I don't even know how to describe it, Well, but this isn't even just the internet, right? Like, this seeps into dealing with potential employers or clients, and unfortunately, these people that are on the internet they're people, right? They're in real life somewhere, and I seem to be running into a lot of this, and I recently had a conversation, and I won't go into a whole lot of detail about it, but the gist of the conversation was, oh, so we really like this thing that you did for this other company, but we're a agile shop, we're a scrum fall shop. And why don't you like that? And it's like, God damn it, look, you do whatever you want to do, and oops. It's like separating your personal opinion from, I don't know, it's weird. It's like, yes, that's my opinion, but I'm a professional, so I'm gonna do whatever you want me to do, and if I have a problem with it, I'm gonna go punch a punching bag on my own time. I'm not gonna, you know what I'm saying? It's like, you can't, nowadays it's so hard to separate yourself from yeah, exactly. Well, yeah. See, the thing about John and Casey, though, and I don't know about Casey, but John obviously has fuck you money, right? So John just doesn't give a care, period. I mean, that's how I read John, right? John does what he does. He's going to do it his way. He has fuck you money, and nobody else matters. Right? And that's great. If you're in that position, that's a wonderful position to be in. I mean, like, truly, that's what I think everybody wants to do. You know, they want to be in that position, if they could be. Again, I don't know if Casey's in a similar position. He probably is. Maybe not as good as John's, but not bad. And I mean, yeah, you know, because other than customers, right, and dealing with somebody who's going to buy your game, buy your product, that's different than trying to play nice with people so that you can get hired, right, for a consulting gig or something. But I also would say that guys like John and Casey, and I mean, this is, and I'm sure if you talked with John Carmack and a lot of other people in that industry, right, in that world, you know, the bullshit doesn't really matter as much. It's all about what you shipped. So either you made a game and you shipped it and you made millions, or you didn't. It's that simple. All the other stuff kind of falls over. It doesn't, since that's one big difference, in my opinion, between the game industry and, say, building internal applications for corporations, right? In the game industry, if you don't ship, people go bankrupt and bad things happen. When you're working on some internal thing, and that internal thing is not really like they want it, but it's really just somebody's pet project, they're not shipping it outside their doors, it's a very different experience. And I would just say that if you're in that mode of, if I don't ship this, I don't eat, then yeah, you're gonna develop a personality where you know, don't bother me with crap that doesn't impact shipping, right? I just want to ship. I will say this. I've noticed recently on Twitter, a lot of the Agile community, like Agile seems to be kind of having issues. And I think a lot of that, like the the chickens are coming home to roost, so to speak, because what a lot of the purveyors of the Agile dream described and what I think most people are experiencing in practice are vastly different. And people are coming back and saying, wait, this doesn't match what I thought this was supposed to be. And how do I get to this utopia that, you told me was going to happen because I'm doing, Agile? And of course, then all the qualifications start coming out. Well, if you have a healthy team, then this works. If you don't have a dysfunctional company, then this works. Right? But yeah. Okay. And I did that entire refactoring while I was talking, and I don't remember doing it. Like, I changed all that stuff, and I just don't remember it. How's that for autopilot? Okay, so... yeah. Well, and Uncle Bob really pisses me off a lot recently. Like, he's really, I agree with some of the stuff he says, but like recently he's really upped the rhetoric in the sense that, like, if you don't do TDD, then you're ethically failing, right? And I don't, that's the wrong way to go about doing it, in my opinion. I understand where he's coming from. He wants codified, consistent standards and all that, but, calling like 3/4 of, the development community unethical, I don't think that's really gonna work the way he wants. It's just gonna piss people off. Kind of pisses me off. Well, yeah, I agree, Cash. But I would also go one step further and say, again, I've mentioned this to folks, and I just, people don't, because again, if you haven't had experience with it, you wouldn't understand. But Kent developed TDD under the lens of Smalltalk. And it's a very different development experience. It's not like what I'm doing right now. Smalltalk has almost no syntax. It's very high level. It's persistent. There's just lots of attributes there that, and I've always said this, right? If you replicate the technical environment that the C3 project had, they had Gemstone, which is an orthogonally persistent Smalltalk runtime, right? So they didn't have to write any persistence code at all. It just worked. They had transactions. I mean, imagine writing Smalltalk code and it's just transactional, And I'm not saying it's perfect. I'm saying compared to what a lot of people after that had to go through to try to build systems that didn't have those things. But if you replicated what those guys had, technically, then all of a sudden a lot of those practices seem much less odious than they are in other types of development environments. Now, again, I don't think development environment is the only part of it that's important, but I think it was a major part of it. And I also think, and I think Alistair Coburn used to say this, that, I mean, if you look at the C3 project, they had Kent, they had Ron Jeffries, they had Ward Cunningham part-time. These are guys that they were already like 20 some years into their career at this point. These guys were not kids that just came out of school. They were kind of, they had their calluses, right? They had gone through what works and what doesn't. And they were able to horse trade, right, with management at C3. But even beyond all that, you know, if I remember right, Alistair Coburn used to say that without Kent, without Ron, you know, how well does it work? And isn't it interesting that shortly after those guys left Chrysler, you know, within a very short period of time, within a year, more or less, like Agile and XP they weren't doing it anymore. So, you know, I think there's a lot to be said that if you have a talented team that could produce software regardless of the methodology, they're going to produce software. You know, the fact that they happen to use this particular process of doing it, you know, I don't know that that really gives you a whole lot of extra information other than skilled people can use any process to produce something. Well, and the thing is, which Agile methodology became the winner? Well, Scrum did. Why? Because Scrum is, here's Scrum. We have a time box. Plan for the time box. Inside the time box, stuff happens. After the time box, beat people up over what happened in the time box. Repeat. See, XP at least said, tried, you know, whether you agree with them or not, they tried to say what happens inside the box. But isn't it interesting that nobody wanted that, right? Nobody wanted to be told this is what should happen inside the box. All management wanted was, here's a box, you know, and some, you know, slaves, get stuff done. You're in the box, you know. Yeah. This is why I don't get any work. Okay, what did I do? So, I created a scope manager, and I don't really like the name, but I had to use something temporarily. And essentially, this is pretty close, right? This has got the scope stack on it, the module stack, the top level stack. It's got the list of, you know, identifiers with unknown types, intern strings, unresolved identifier references. These are all things that are related to scoping and definitions. And so all these helper methods essentially that were related to this, you know, visiting the block hierarchy, finding a type, finding a type for an identifier, adding scopes, removing scopes, getting the module stack, you know, walking qualified symbols and all that good stuff. All this stuff makes sense here. Now, again, I think this is going to need to be tidied up and cleaned up, but it succeeded in allowing me to move all this functionality out of program, which is where it was, but is no longer. So now program is so much simpler. Program is almost a normal element. Again, it just has the block that it owns, and we have a normal accessor for that. Excuse me. We have a couple of helper functions around the compilation process, which those things need to move, right? So disassemble, compile, module, compile, these are all going to move to the session. And a lot of these are going to follow suit. And then program will truly just be an element again. And I was able to get rid of all the friend stuff. Don't need to do that anymore because we're not looking at programs innards. So then on session, I put the scope manager, put an accessor. So I have a constant, non-const accessor for it because there's a couple different contexts where we use that. In the module for session, I just initialize the scope manager, pass in the session pointer, and then the rest of these are all just updates to use the scope manager that's on the session instead of talking to program. We looked at that. Sorry, man, my allergies are just driving me insane today. And then program still has on emit, and it was accessing quite a bit of stuff because this used to be on program. And so now we're going through the scope manager for that. Now a lot of this again is going to move to the session, not all of it, but most of it. So a lot of this is going to get relocalized inside of session, which will be very clean. But baby steps, baby steps, baby steps. So now to walk the blocks in the scope manager, we just session scope manager instead of talking to program. Yeah, most of these are very simple changes. Element Builder had a lot of stuff because we were looking things up like the module and types, and so there were a lot of changes here to Scope Manager. See you later, Cloud Journeyman. He had quite a few touch-ups in the AST evaluator. Again, this stuff used to be on program, now it's on Scope Manager. All right, that's great. I'm happy with that. So the very next step will be to move the remaining behavior with the exception of on emit. I mean, I'm going to leave that. That needs to then get kind of broken down and refactored inside a program so it's not so obnoxious. Then I would say that this number 17 is done. You know, like it's I met the goal I set out to meet with that one, and that was I wanted to decompose program into something more logical and reusable and more consistent, and I think I've done that. Then number 16 This now is more internal to the AST evaluator versus program, right? It's just then it's cleaning up the evaluator and making that stuff not so duplicated. And I think, I don't know, I might actually be able to get both of these done today. We'll see. All right, that's going to do it for me. I'm going to push these up. So let's see if we can find somebody to host here real quick. Twitch, oh yeah, this guy, he's Brooke Zerker, doing a lot of Rust stuff. That was pretty cool. I was amazed at how slow, though, the Rust compiler was on some of the stuff he was doing. I'm like, man, that's slow. A noob bangs his head against JavaScript. 2048 game invitation. Learning to type. That's the beginning, man, right there. Let's do Brooke Zerker again here. All right, gonna raid him, say hi, be nice. I'll be back online tomorrow, 5 a.m. We'll pick up wherever I leave off. And I think we'll probably, like I say, I'm hoping I can have this refactoring tidied up today. And then I'll get back into adding more features and get more going in the compiler. Be good times, good times. So, see everybody tomorrow. Have a good one. Bye.